No.
No, it's not common sense. It's literally my job to know those things about the webinar.
Yeah.
Make
Yeah,
sure
that's
it's going
true.
well.
That's true. It's funny, a lot of things, once you hear it, it seems like common sense, but it never would have occurred to you otherwise.
Oh, the first time someone told me in online school, they're like, if you're having issues with your internet, to just turn off your video, right? It'll help. And
Yeah.
I was like, you are a magician. I did not know that this
Exactly.
existed.
Huge big light bulb moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get everything pulled up on my screen anyway, again, just to be on the safe side, just in case Colette has challenges with her internet.
Hey, smart.
Yeah. That's one of the things I think we all learned from co-teaching. I mean, when we were doing in-person classes, one attorney would drive to wherever it was and teach. But once we started doing it by Zoom, for the most part, we had two attorneys teaching at the same time, just to be a little bit more engaging and more interactive.
Yeah.
But it's also a good safety net in case someone's internet acted up or the screen froze or just some weird sort of glitch. And, then the other person could just take over, and it was, seamless, I guess, for everybody who was in the class. And there were a
Absolutely.
couple times that happened.
Yeah. Can I go ahead? I'm going to share the webinar video. I want to make sure you can hear it, so that way
Sure.
we don't run into an issue where everyone is just watching a video with us now. Can you hear it?
I can hear it.
Perfect. That's
I
what
can
I
hear it.
love
I
to
can
hear.
see it.
Perfect. Exactly what I wanted to hear.
So you guys got a lot of good stuff going on, webinar-wise and events.
Yeah, and I mean, they're all just kind of webinars, not, but events are all just at the same time this year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just like it feels like I'm doing because I'm doing the same thing 5 different times for like 5 different events.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
it's 4 events, but then webinars and meetings and stuff. And so it's like, okay, we got the venue, contract for the venue, payment
Right.
for the venue,
Right.
caterers, and so it's nice that I can just go thing by thing for all of them.
Checklist. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, but we're definitely in the crazy time now with the conference of trying to get registration open and starting the marketing for that.
Right.
So once that is all secured, we will have some breathing time, which will be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I think it's I don't know. At first I was thinking, I don't know about doing a live event, but I think, well, now that everything has happened, I think it's going to be fine. I think, maybe attendance might not be as great as we would have hoped, but I don't even know that there's anything we can do about that. Some people are not comfortable and, may not be comfortable going out for a little while.
Yeah, so actually, I don't know if you've heard, but the event is actually going to be a hybrid event. We've
Oh yeah,
secured
that's
that.
right. The streaming. I forgot about
Yeah,
that. The live
so
stream.
yeah, we think we're going to have actually the highest attendance that there's been. Not in person, obviously, but just overall, because people who don't want to take off work,
Right.
people who just
The
want to have
drive.
access to the content when they feel like watching it, they don't want to just sit and have to be absorbed in it for 3 days.
Right.
So we think we are going to get some increased attendance there. And just there are some people, like one of our committee members is immune compromised. And she was like, I just don't think I'll be cleared even then because I can't get the vaccine because of my
Right.
condition. So I don't think I'll be cleared to go.
Right.
And some people were unhappy about us moving to Ocean City again, whereas
Right.
the general membership was thrilled, but
Right.
some people.
Exactly.
So
That's a tough balancing act right there.
yeah, so I'm not sure that this hybrid event will be a one-time thing. I'm curious to see if it'll kind of stick around.
Yeah. I would think that it would. I mean, even just the geography alone, um, someone from Garrett County, in Western Maryland, it's a hike for them to get to Ocean City. And if it's
Absolutely.
for, a one-day thing, I guess if they're very involved in the association, they're the president out there or something, they might do it. But I think the average member is probably not going to be perfectly honest.
I agree. And we're trying to move from Ocean City for 2022. I'm working on looking at venues for that conference. But we're thinking just in terms of diversity and the history of Ocean City, we'd prefer a different area of Maryland as
Right.
it would be more racially and just overall inclusive.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so we're not I have some venues I'm looking at on the National Harbor, but I'm not sure that they'll be cost effective, which was a main
Right,
concern of the 2019 conference.
right. Right.
So, yeah, but we're looking some other places. I have a list of like 12 venues that we're looking into.
Oh, cool,
So,
cool.
yeah, I'm really excited, but I think that will be the only determiner of hybrid at that point, I think, is because we're more central, do we still want to offer it? And we'll honestly have to wait to make that decision until we have the analytics back from
Right,
this year's conference.
right. I think some of the other states, I think Virginia, I think they rotate where their conference is held, if I remember right. I think they do it at Virginia Beach one year and they do it somewhere else. I'm not, I don't even know exactly, but I think that they rotate to maybe somewhere in Northern Virginia, but I think they
Mhm.
go back and forth. That might be the way we end up going. National Harbor was a phenomenal location. I mean, it just looked great. The hall it looked professional. It looked, wow. People walked in and they were like, wow, this is great. But, you pay for wow. Wow costs.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, we're looking at the MGM on the National Harbor, but I have a feeling that will not be a cost-effective option.
right.
But we're looking, there's one in College Park, there's one in Frederick. So we're looking around. I have a feeling it may be we go back to the beach every couple of years, like you were saying, do a rotational
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
But at this point, I know Dan and I are kind of looking at, do we find somewhere where they'll give us a decreased price and we can look at a 2 or 3 year contract?
Right. Right.
So we're also looking into that too, of do we want a consistent location for a couple of years or do we want to keep rotating it around?
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll really come down to what the venues kind of have to offer. I'm working on the request for proposal now.
Oh yeah, good, good. We did one of the commercial symposiums, I think it was 2 years ago. They did that down at College Park, the hotel at College Park. That was another again, we just did a 1 day thing. It wasn't even overnight.
Hmm.
Most of the attendees are from, work around the I-95 corridor. So everybody was within driving distance. I think a couple staff people stayed overnight, but that was a very
Hmm.
nice venue. Really nice. Again, the same thing, just sort of that wow factor when you walk in.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for. Is something that's wow, but also something that doesn't give a price that says wow.
right, right, right. Yeah, that's
Um,
that's that's how I'm trying to manage my way through life. It's not always easy.
oh, not at all. But
Yeah,
yeah, so that's kind of our goal right now is figuring that out.
yeah.
Um,
Hey, what's
but
this I saw on LinkedIn? You won an award at Towson?
yeah, so
That
many
was
people don't know, but I'm in my last semester. I haven't graduated yet.
right.
So, yeah, I had to enter an entrepreneurship competition for class, and it
Hmm.
was out of like 300 people, and they narrowed it down to the top 10. And actually, two of my ideas for two separate classes made it into the top 10.
Wow.
Um, and then I presented, and very surprisingly found out I won.
That's
So,
fantastic.
yeah, super exciting. It's been a whirlwind because I did not realize how much like Towson publicity there would be afterwards. I thought it was kind of you just won and then you moved on. Uh,
Right, like within the department or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, but it's been like University Admissions is the one who posted that article all over social media, and then
Yeah.
the Honors College is about to do another article. So it's super cool.
Yeah, it is. It's
Yeah,
exciting for you, like, wrapping up college and starting your career and then having that's kind of a combination of the both. So
yeah,
it's gonna be
absolutely. And now
perfect.
it's just kind of figuring out which it'll be more of a once I'm graduated and not doing school and work full time.
Yeah. You want to know what to do with all your free time.
I know, right? So
Yeah.
well, I'll be starting my master's degree this summer, so I'll still have school,
Oh, are
just
you?
not to the
Okay.
extent I do now.
Where are you doing?
Um,
Is that gonna be Towson as well?
Yep, Towson, they offered a 4+1 program, so I did 4 years of undergrad and then just 1 year of my graduate program.
Okay.
So I've been taking the classes for it. I have 7 left, and then I'll graduate with that next spring.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, so that's been awesome. But come summer, I'll figure out they give me money for winning the competition that I can use to start my idea. So I got to see how I want to go about that because I'm not
Yeah.
really ready to start a company by any
Right.
means. So
So much for free time.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So just trying to play it by ear and figure out kind of what the next steps are because I don't want to let the money go to waste.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not.
So yeah, it's been crazy.
That's fantastic. That's a good crazy.
Yes, of course. And how are you doing? I heard you and your family unfortunately got sick.
Yeah, we all of us did. It was a little tough. I can't remember if I mentioned to you or not. My youngest son has disability. He has special needs, and
Mhm.
he has I think I might have mentioned that to you when we were talking about therapy dogs, maybe.
Mhm.
But he has a nursing care that comes in at night and helps him. He's got equipment and stuff that whatever. So me and my husband can sleep. We have nursing care at night. And I
Mhm.
think the nurse, I think, is the one who brought it into the house because she wasn't vaccinated, and apparently the agency wasn't requiring them to be tested regularly, which was a little shocking to me. Um, but my youngest son with the disability was the first one who tested positive. He had a fever for a couple of days, and it never even
Wow.
occurred to me COVID because he's been doing school virtually. We're very careful. I'm not
Absolutely.
crazy cautious, but very cautious. And he really
Absolutely.
hasn't been anywhere. We've done medical appointments virtually. His grandmother passed away, and we did this service virtually. Really, we were pretty cautious. But anyway, he had a fever for 3 days, and I called the pediatrician on like the beginning of the third day, and I'm like, at what point does this get troubling where we need to do something? And he
Mhm.
set up a video conference immediately, and he said, Kathleen, it's COVID. I was like, what? And he said, right now, the way things are, you have to assume that everything is COVID until you rule it out. So I'm going to put it in order to get him tested. And I was really shocked that it was COVID.
Mhm.
So the nurse got tested the next day. The nurse was positive but had no symptoms. And then it just sort of rolled with us a little bit. We all tested positive, but it took like a day or two before each of us got symptoms. So
Mhm.
I had my first dose of the vaccine. I'm like a big walking public service announcement for the vaccine now because I had I had almost no symptoms at all, honestly. And I'm the oldest. I don't exercise like I should. I could lose a pound or 20. I would, on paper, I would have looked like I would have had a worse outcome. But I had a fever for a couple hours here and there. Took an aspirin, it went away. I had a headache, same thing for an hour or two here and there. It went away with an aspirin. I think I had one night where I had a little bit of a fever and a little bit of chills, but that was just one night. So really, my thing was resolved in like 3 days.
Wow.
And my other son had a little more symptoms than I did, but not much. But my husband had it rough. He had not been vaccinated, so I think he's going to get vaccinated as soon as he can now. But he actually had to go to the hospital and had pneumonia and just
Oh,
it's
wow.
been rough.
I'm
So
sorry to hear that.
yeah, well, he's back now. He got back from the hospital yesterday, so we're all happy now. I think that we've turned that corner and we're all on the mend. So
Well, I'm
um,
glad to hear everyone's okay.
yes.
Welcome, Colette and Mark.
All right, is Colette
Maybe.
back? I can't hear anybody.
No, they're
Are they,
not.
are they
They're
muted?
both muted.
Okay. Colette, were you going to run the slides? Remember we talked about that yesterday. I'm not sure. So far, my internet's fine, but yesterday it was not fine, so I'm not sure what makes the most sense. So I just turned my video on. I'm going to get in trouble with Chuck again. I'm not sure my shoulders are squared up appropriately.
I think you're totally fine.
Yeah.
My video won't come on at all during this just because we like to keep mine as Maryland Realtors, and actually I will be changing my name to Maryland
Oh,
Realtors.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
So I'm supposed to just be kind of a ghost. But the way it'll go is we'll start the webinar right at 1. We'll give it about a minute for people to start getting into the webinar. And then at that point, I'll play the video, I'll do a short intro, and then it'll go right to you, Kathleen.
Okay. And then me or Colette, whichever one's doing it. We have a short little slide deck, a PowerPoint presentation, like basically one slide for each topic. It doesn't have much text on it or whatever, just to kind of keep us focused,
Mhm.
keep the audience on topic as well.
Sure, and I'll go ahead and I'll respond to the majority of the Q&As, especially if they're regarding, will I be able to get the slide deck after the presentation? When will I be able to see a recording? Those kinds of things. So I'll
Right.
address that in the little intro, and then again, I will respond to any of those type of questions. But then it's up to you guys if you want at the end to look in the Q&A and see what's there and answer those, or if you want to stop and answer them throughout, that's kind of really up to you guys.
Mark and Colette, what do you think? I think last time we sort of end up doing a little combination of both, Adrienne, if I remember
Okay,
right. I think
perfect.
we did sort of stop toward the end of each topic to see if there were questions related to that. I mean, people
Perfect.
would just throw out random questions, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to stay, on topic as much as possible. So I think at the end of each section, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I think at the end of each section, we went and looked at the chat a little bit, answered a couple questions, but also, being mindful of the clock. If we needed to move on to the next section, we
Sure.
did. And then Dan, or even maybe it was you, I'm not sure who collected the questions at the end that had been submitted from the chat, and then
Mhm.
put it into a spreadsheet format and sent it over to us, and we just divided them up. And each of
Sure.
us responded to anything that hadn't been responded to online. We responded to by email after the
Great.
webinar.
Yeah, I can keep track of those.
Okay. Okay.
Putting on my RPAC pin. I'm hoping that it will cause some subliminal contributions.
There you go. I was looking for mine. I'm not sure where it is. It might be in a different purse. I don't know. Because I was thinking the same thing. I thought, oh, I should wear that, but I'll have to grab one from your desk next time I'm at the office.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple hundred.
I don't know if Colette, you want to practice sharing the screen or anything. This is your guys' time for the next 5 minutes to figure out any last minute things you need to ask any questions, anything like that. Y'all are experienced with this, but
Colette, were you going to do the screen share? I can't tell if she's there or not.
You said you were going to do that.
Oh, okay. I don't
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
make me- Well, then I was unstable, so I wasn't sure. My internet was unstable.
I
back to
remember. I remember now.
I'm back to my basement hole though, so maybe it'll work. Let me see. Everybody see that?
perfect.
I can
Yes.
see it now. Yeah, very good.
Okay. Slide deck from beginning. Good.
Looks nice.
Perfect.
Look at Colette with her PowerPoint skills. Oops.
It's a really nice PowerPoint.
Advertising. Look at that. Fancy, huh?
Very impressive.
Source of income. That's you, Mark.
Oh, am I talking about that?
And then clients who discriminate. All right, so that's good.
Perfect.
And we'll stop the share. And what else did we want to share? Let me make sure I can pull those other things up. Close everything else out. What's this? That.
Yeah, and then at the end, once you all are done speaking, I'll do a brief outro and then end the webinar.
Okay. I'll close out some of my other.
Three minutes until we're live.
All right.
It was snowing at my house this morning. Was it snowing anywhere else or just here?
Oh my God. Where do you live?
Reisterstown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're right near Glendon.
Oh, right. I know. Yeah, I have friends who live up there. I know exactly where that is.
Yeah, but it was flurrying most of the morning.
I was surprised. We have a thermostat in the house, and it shows what the outside temperature is, and it said 36. I think I did like a double take. I was like, what? It was like 70 or something in the daytime last time I was out. Like, how did that happen? But I didn't see any flurries.
Yeah, we were very surprised to walk out and it was flurrying this morning.
All right, Mark, you don't have any handouts or anything you wanted to pull up, did you?
No.
Okay.
It's too complicated.
And anything you want to be sent out in the post email, just go ahead and send to me or send it to me and CC Dan or whatever, and we'll make sure it gets in that afterward email.
Okay.
What's the count up to, Adrienne?
We were up to 300 this morning that had registered. So we'll probably anticipate about 100 to 150 to attend.
Right.
But we'll send all the stuff out and this will be posted to the YouTube. So
yeah, I just threatened my teenager to keep it quiet that I was speaking to 500 people.
That works. That's I don't know, my teenager, that would probably be a motivator the other way. Oh, great. I can distract and interrupt 500 people. Woo! Let me do it.
Woohoo.
Am I
So we have
sharing screen or are you guys?
I think I can. It looks like my
Okay.
internet is better. I'm back to my basement hole and my internet works better down here for some reason. So I
Okay.
think I'm good.
We're about to go live. I'll let you know when I'm clicking that we're going live. But at that point, like I said, I'll give it about 30 seconds to a minute and I'll play the video, do the intro, and then it's right over to you guys.
Okay. Okay.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment in Maryland Realtors webinar series. Today's topic, fair housing, is important not just because April is Fair Housing Month. Fair housing matters because barriers to housing opportunity exist to this day, and it is up to realtors everywhere to really fight for fair housing. Today, the Maryland Realtors legal team has put together a program to discuss fair housing issues. As you have questions for our panel, please place them in the Q&A box, and we will attempt to answer your questions at the appropriate time during the presentation. Thank you again for your attendance. We will send links to the slide deck and this webinar in the following week. For now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Maryland Realtors Legal Dream Team, Kathleen Dartez, Colette Massingale, and Mark Feinroth.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are delighted to be here. And what the topic is fair housing, and we're going to really focus on some questions that have come into the legal hotline, sort of hot topics related to fair housing. We have a slide deck just to keep us on track. Let me share that so everyone can see. Let me hope everybody can see that.
Yes.
Everybody can see that? Yes. Okay. All right. So this is our fair housing webinar. And this is our agenda, what we're going to start with today and focus on. We're going to start with steering. We're going to talk about advertising a little bit, pocket listings, which is a hot topic. Source of income. I think everybody listening probably knows that source of income was added as a protected class in the state of Maryland in October of last year. So that's still relatively new and still hot, maybe not hot, but still a hot topic. And then clients who discriminate. What should you do if you are working with a client who's discriminating? Where would you report it? Things like that we're going to discuss as well. What we're doing, I think Adrian had alluded to briefly, we're going to try and stick to this agenda. So if you have questions in the chat, as we're going through the material, we'll look at the chat, and if there are questions related to the topic that we're on, we'll answer those as best we can as we're going through, trying to keep it to each topic so we can move forward and finish on time. Any questions that we don't get to, our Cracker Jack communications team will gather those for us and send it to us, and we can respond to those by email over the next week or so whenever we get those. All right, so let's get started. I guess steering is a hot topic. I think everybody recently has been hearing a lot of things in the news and reading, and there's been a lot of discussion about fair housing and different investigations that have been going on. There was an undercover, I guess, investigation up in Long Island, New York. There's a great video on that if you haven't seen it. Long Island Divided, it was called. But one of the main issues or bad behaviors that was shown and demonstrated by that video was agents who were improperly steering clients to or from certain neighborhoods, and some of the practices that the agents were engaging in that essentially limited opportunities for certain buyers to purchase homes in certain communities, and perpetuated patterns of segregation that have existed for, for a long time. Big picture, I think everyone's been paying attention. We've all been reading articles. There's issues maybe with appraisals. There's issues with, there's a home ownership gap and wealth gap and all those sort of things. Some of those things we can control. Some of those really are outside of our bailiwick or outside of our daily, business practices. But steering clearly is something that every agent, every licensee, every realtor should be aware of and should be thinking about their own practices. What am I doing? How can I make sure that I am not steering someone to or from a certain community based on some bias that I may have in my mind? I may not even be aware of it. It's possible there's an implicit bias or something that you're thinking. You think a person might be happier in this community because they're Asian. This has a large Asian community. There's an Asian grocery store. I'm sure they'd love to be in this community. And you may just show them homes in that neighborhood or that community. So those are the kind of things that we have to avoid. And that really is the thing that's most directly under our control as licensees, as realtors. I have a checklist that we created. Let me see if I can figure out how to share that. Let me, hold on one second. I'm sorry. The checklist. Yes, there it is. All right, so this is sort of some best practices here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. We created kind of a checklist here for you guys to think about. We can distribute this after the webinar as well if anybody wants a copy of it. It's some things that you may not be thinking about, but these examples up here, all of these things they're basically do not do or things to do, they're all based on actions that were, a lot of them were from that Newsday investigation. A lot of them are for cases, administrative cases brought by HUD against licensees. Over the past couple of years, we keep track of those kind of things and we see a lot of these issues. The first one up here, return phone calls. Now, you guys are going to look at me like I'm crazy. Even through the Zoom, I can see you're looking at me like I'm crazy. We're salespeople. Of course, we return all phone calls. Well, not everyone does. HUD has disciplined agents. There was this was, I think, 2 years ago, there was a situation, people who had certain names, people whose names sounded like they might be foreign, people whose names sounded like they might be from a certain ethnicity. There were agents who did not return those phone calls. And oftentimes they were testers and they were leaving messages. And some of them never received return phone calls from anyone. And another tester who had more whatever sounding name, a different sounding name, did receive return phone calls. So there was sort of a practice there, a pattern that some of these agents were demonstrating in not returning phone calls. So again, that seems very obvious. And again, I can see you guys looking at me like a big duh, Kathleen. But just be aware of that. Do you return all phone calls? The person may not be able to purchase. The person may want rental or property management, and maybe you don't do that, but you could refer them to a client, to a colleague. But you can't just ignore calls, and especially you can't just ignore calls based on someone's name or what your perception of what their name is, or your perception of what their financial ability might be based on their name. That's going to get you in trouble. So if something as straightforward as that, make sure you return your phone calls, or have your your assistant return phone calls, whatever it is you need to do to follow up on that. Brokerage agreements, you guys know brokerage agreements are required here in Maryland. You have to have a written brokerage agreement to represent a client. This was something that was shown in the Long Island video as well. Sometimes the agents required people to have a written brokerage agreement. Sometimes they didn't. If someone was uncomfortable signing a brokerage agreement, sometimes based on the person's race or national origin, sometimes that basically was like a deal breaker. The agent wasn't going to work with them, wasn't going to take them out and show any properties. Another time, someone who also was uncomfortable with signing a brokerage agreement, if they were white or a different race, the agent had no problem with that and took them out and showed them homes anyway. So in Maryland, you're supposed to have a brokerage agreement if you want to represent the party. Of course, you can show a buyer a property as a subagent of the seller if the buyer doesn't want to sign a written agreement. So you could still show the home to the buyer. But whatever your practice is, again, you have to make sure that it's consistent. You're doing the same thing with everybody, regardless of whether the client is Asian, white, male, female, Jewish, Muslim, whatever it is. Whatever your practice is, it has to be done consistently across the board. And the next couple things here are kind of the main points here. And this is a little bit just, you have to take a step back and think. You have to establish what the client's criteria is. This was really a focus of the gentleman who did the Newsday investigation. I just blanked on his name. Colette, what's his name?
I believe it's Bill Dedman.
Bill Dedman. He focused on this a lot, and he's done a couple different presentations since then. That he's a great speaker and has a really good perspective on this. If you get a chance to listen to him, I would encourage you to do so. But basically, you should be establishing your client's criteria, what they want, right? They want a home at whatever price point. They want a townhouse. They want a condo. They want to live in a city. They want to live in the county. They want to live in a farm, a couple acres, whatever it is. Objective criteria. What is it that they're looking for? You should stay away from subjective criteria, right? Subjective meaning it's not like something fact-based, it'd be something like your opinion of the neighborhood or the community. Is it a nice neighborhood? Will they feel good in that in that neighborhood? Is it a good fit for them in that neighborhood? That's really what you have to stay away from, because that's where whatever bias you might have in your head, whether you realize it or not, you might be tending to show some people homes in certain communities and other people homes in other communities. So that's just something, again, we all do have biases in our head. I'll admit, the one example I use, I sometimes look at people's shoes, right? They have nice shoes. I'm thinking, they've got some money. They spend money on their shoes. Maybe they're wearing flip-flops, and you make a certain impression, or you think a certain thing. We all have biases. We all have certain thoughts that occur to us. The important part for us in our profession is that cannot affect your profession. That cannot affect you in what homes you show to a buyer, what listings you provide to a potential buyer. You're going to let them make the decision, whatever their objective criteria is. They want this price point. They want a suburb. They want a city, whatever it is. Give them listings based on their objective criteria. And if they say they want a nice community, good schools, really you have to kind of drill in on that a little bit more, again, to try and get to objective criteria. Was a big discussion in that Long Island divided video about good schools. What is a good school? And I think that is a very subjective criteria. Children have all different kinds of needs, all different kind of interests. Parents have all different kind of expectations. In all honesty, I don't think there is a standard definition of a good school. If your child is interested in, music and the arts, a good school for them might be a very different school for your, child who's interested in engineering and technology or something. So that's something you have to be careful of as well. You can direct your clients to a third-party source if they are concerned about whatever it might be. They can go to the county website. They could look up things themselves. They could visit schools themselves. But you really have to stay away from that, good schools, and because that's sort of tends to be a code for race or national origin, where you don't want to live in this community because they don't have good schools. This community does have good schools. And again, this video is a very clear example of that. Some people tended to refer certain clients to this community and other clients to the other community, and it tended to be correlated with their race or their national origin. I know that everyone is thinking this doesn't happen. We don't do this here in Maryland, and no one does this intentionally or doesn't think about it, but this is what the importance of this, having a checklist and thinking about it. Just take a step back and think about what you do and how you respond to questions. How do you identify your client's criteria? In the Long Island investigation, 49% of the Black testers were discriminated against or received unequal treatment. 49% of the Black potential buyers, 29% of the Hispanic buyers or testers received differing treatment as well. So it was happening. It was happening pretty regularly. So the best way to think about this is just examine your business practices, examine yourself and think, what am I doing? Let me make sure I have a checklist. Let me make sure I take a step back and make sure that I'm not sending someone to a community because I think they'll be happy there. I think they'll be a good fit. Let me just focus on the facts, what they're looking for, what they want, what their price point is, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing down here, provide listings based on clients' objective criteria. That's sort of following on the same concept before. You're going to give them a list of everything they might be interested in, right? And then they can narrow the list and say, we don't want to look at homes in this community. We want to look at homes here. So they can narrow the list. You shouldn't narrow it for them thinking like, oh, they're going to be happy in this community. They're going to like this, right? So you're going to give them listings based on whatever their criteria is. They can narrow the list from that point going forward. Meeting with a client, again, some of this seems to be common sense, but the video did show that there are some discrepancies also in how people conduct meetings with clients, right? Are you going to ask for an ID for someone when you meet with them the first time. As a side note, I think that's a good idea just for safety reasons. But that video showed some of the realtors asked for ID or required ID. They didn't do it all the time. So again, there might be a correlation there. Why are you asking for ID from some people, but not from everyone? So again, this is a great thing for a checklist. If you want to see someone's ID, put it on your checklist. You ask for everyone's ID, whether they're male, female, young, old, whatever it is, you're going to get everyone's ID you're going to ask for. A pre-qualification letter. That was another one that was sort of focused on pretty heavily in that video. There was one licensee who was meeting with two testers. One was black, one was white. And again, these are testers. So they're exactly identically capable financially in purchasing the property. Same credit score, same income, same everything, right? And this licensee asked if the potential buyers had a pre-qualification letter, and the black applicant said that she did not. She was going to talk with a lender the following week. She didn't have one, and the licensee told the black buyer, "Then I can't take you out. I'm sorry, I can't take you out and show you properties. Somebody else might, but I just can't do that." And then the 30 seconds later, they show a video of a white potential buyer who does not have a pre-qualification letter, and the same licensee says to the white buyer, "When do you want to start looking at houses?" No pre-qualification letter required for her. So again, if you want to have a pre-qualification letter, if you want to help your buyers get pre-approved, whatever you want to do, you can do it, but just make sure you're doing that consistently. You're not going to tell, young applicants or people of a certain, national origin, let's say Hispanic applicants, you're not going to say you have to go get pre-approved or you have to get pre-qualified before I can take you out. And then let, a white applicant or a black applicant, you'll take them out without a pre-qualification or pre-approval. So whatever criteria you want is fine. Just Fair Housing 101, make sure you're applying it consistently across the board. Property showings as well. Again, this is sort of a common sense thing, but that did show that it was occurring in that video. The neighborhoods that the clients choose are based on the client's objective criteria. I listened to another presentation, and this might be something maybe for an office manager or a broker to think about. Maybe look at your listings. What communities are your listings from? Look at your closed sales, your completed transactions. What communities, what neighborhoods are they in? Maybe if you look at a map, maybe you'll see that there's certain communities where you don't have any listings. Maybe you guys need to do a bus trip and check out that community and learn a little bit more about it and maybe focus on that. Is there a reason why all of your listings and all of your sales are focused in certain neighborhoods? So just again, the main point there is based on the client's objective criteria, what they're looking for in a home. Make sure you're showing them homes in neighborhoods that are based on their criteria, not where you think they might be happy. I'm not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time on offers and counteroffers. Love letters, we have talked about, I think, in other presentations, and there's been articles in our magazine as well. Love letters are of some concern. I think you guys are all aware of this, with this market right now. It's a tight market, more buyers than properties, right? So buyers want to make their offer stand out, right? What can I do to make my offer more attractive to the seller? And there are companies and coaches and whatnot who recommend that a buyer write a love letter to the seller, explaining why I would be perfect for this house, or why this is a perfect house for me and my family, for me and my children, for me and my spouse. It's so close to the church. It's so close to the synagogue. It's so whatever. The bottom line on that, the National Association of Realtors has given guidance on this. We've given guidance on it as well. If you guys have done the Fair Haven exercise through the National Association of Realtors, you would have seen this as well. The best guidance, the best recommendation is that you don't help draft a love letter. You don't deliver, you don't read a love letter, and you don't deliver a love letter. That was the guidance from NAR in that Fair Haven exercise. And that really is our strong recommendation. That is the best practice. Speak with your broker, your office manager, to determine if your office has a policy. But really just think about it. What's the purpose of a love letter, right? The seller should be making their decision based on the contract, right? The financial terms. When can you settle? What's the price? Closing help, whatever it might be. That's what the seller should be thinking about, the financial criteria. The whole purpose of a love letter is really to make the seller think about something else, right? That's what the purpose is. So why would we do that? We're very aware of fair housing concerns. We want to make sure that the seller is not going to reject somebody because of their name, their race, or a perception that they won't be able to afford it, or that, you know, something is going to be problematic. We want to avoid any chance of that. We want to stay as far away from that as possible. One of the best ways to do that is to stay away from love letters and really make that clear. You won't read them. You won't help write them, obviously, and you won't deliver them. That's the best guidance from the National Association of Realtors. The Spidey sense, I guess I just had that sort of, this kind of leads into the next topic here. If your client wants to discriminate, we have that as a topic further on in the agenda. So I will pass on that. We'll talk about it later on in the presentation. But just be aware of that as well. Love letters could open the door for someone who is possibly willing to discriminate, may not want to sell their home to a buyer of a certain race or national origin. And if you're presenting love letters showing photos of what they look like, you just open the door to an allegation where that may have been a factor in why they rejected that offer. The best way to avoid realtor jail, the best way to avoid lawsuits or claims being filed against you is really to steer clear of that completely and make your clients aware that you're not going to be participating in that as well. And again, we'll talk a little bit later about some specific situations with clients who want to discriminate and how you can respond and report those incidents. Just again, to summarize, I guess the best practices: create a checklist. We'll share this. You could use this as a starting point, work with your broker, your office manager, and just think about what you do. And the bottom line, it's Fair Housing 101. Whatever your processes, whatever your procedures are, whatever your requirements are, you're going to do that for every single potential buyer, for every single potential tenant, every single time across the board. That really is the safest way to avoid any fair housing issues or any fair housing challenges. Let me stop that. Did we have any questions in the chat?
I would point out, you made some references to the Long Island Divide expose that Bill Dedman did. Just so folks know, he has agreed to participate in a panel discussion at our conference in Ocean City. We're also hoping to get Brian Green from the National Association of Realtors. And so that should be a really great discussion. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch this Long Island Divide expose, it's not very long, maybe about an hour. I know when we've been teaching fair housing here at Maryland Realtors, we show a little bit of it, but definitely worthwhile. And this is just a couple of years ago. So these are not behaviors that, you know, happened 10 years ago. This expose, I believe it posted or published in 2019 or so.
Right.
So yes, and again, New York. So I know, you know, you think, well, that would never happen here in Maryland, but this is, you know, New York, a few hours away. So take some time to look at that and join us in Ocean City, where we'll hear more from Bill Dedman and have a good panel discussion there.
Are you seeing the slideshow? I'm not sure, with my screen's doing something weird.
No, it's not showing the slideshow, but instead of putting up that, could you put up the NAR? There are a couple of questions, but we could put up the NAR at checklist in a second. Let me see. There's a couple of questions regarding the school checklist. I attended an at-home with diversity class sponsored by Maryland Realtors that if a buyer asked about schools, suggest coming back and talking with neighbors. I was very uncomfortable with that practice, and it was in the manual as well. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts, Mark or Kathleen, on how to handle questions, or that I guess that suggestion of going back and talking with neighbors? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
I would say, just in general, I think remember, keep in mind our goal really is to be focusing on objective criteria, you know, factual things, you know, how large are the classes, what's the student to teacher ratio, those kind of things. And I think going and talking to the neighbors, to me, that sort of puts that subjective criteria, that subjective component into it. So I personally would probably not recommend that. I would suggest the person go visit the school. You know, if someone's interested in moving into a certain community, they want to find out if the school would be a good fit for their child or if they would feel comfortable there. You know, you can always go visit a school before you attend. They'll do school tours and whatnot. I think I would feel more comfortable recommending that than recommending that they talk to the neighbors. And honestly, you know, I'm thinking on my street, a lot of the neighbors don't have kids. A lot of them go to private school, go to public school. So talking to the neighbors may not provide really all the information they're looking for anyway. My best suggestion would be to visit the school directly, or, you know, certainly go on the county website and look into different schools and see what schools might fit their criteria. Mark or Colette, did you have anything to add?
I agree with that. Contact the PTA, maybe speak to your parents and leadership, maybe contact the principal, sit in on some classes for the particular grade that your child might be attending in. Try to make it more objective rather than just kind of randomly choosing a door to knock on. You know, I think it's a much better idea to try to hone in on the particular source of the issue that you're trying to find out about.
Right.
I agree with both what you and Kathleen said, Mark.
Okay.
There's another question. Love letters. What about pictures of animals? Is that still opening up a possible discrimination case? I know, Kathleen, in the article that you prepared for the magazine, which was excellent, you talked about pictures generally, which were even more problematic than the love letters themselves. Did you have any specific thoughts on animals, you or Mark? I mean,
pictures of animals, like send a cute kitten video? Is that?
I guess if an animal is part of your family and you show a picture of that, is that any worse, or then does it open up the door to any kind of possible discrimination?
I think this might be splitting hairs. In general, we really don't want love letters, period. That's probably the best way to think about it. Whether someone just sends over a picture of their cute dog and then that accompanies a letter. Part of this is risk management for you all, honestly, because we don't want you to be in a position where you have a love letter in your hand and you have to read it and determine, ooh, does this violate the Fair Housing Act? Does it not violate the Fair Housing Act? They didn't put a picture of their children, but they put a picture of their dog. It's a Chihuahua. What would somebody might think about somebody who owns it? You know, whatever. You don't want to be in a position where you're going to have to determine if the letter is acceptable or unacceptable, if the picture of the dog is acceptable or unacceptable. You want to be careful, or you're not in a situation where you have to make legal conclusions about that letter, whether you can pass it along, whether it possibly violates fair housing. The best practice by far is just not to do it, not to be involved with it. I would say, again, talk to your office manager or broker and see what your policies are within your office. And I think just at the state level, Colette, I believe the statewide forums committee is also looking at this and maybe thinking about possibly modifying either the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement, or possibly both, maybe to add some verbiage in there, just talking about love letters and letting the client know that it's could potentially open the door to an allegation of a violation of the fair housing laws, and that the realtor won't participate in, you know, if they receive one, they won't deliver it, and won't participate in that at all. So that's another thing that the statewide forums committee is working on at the state level.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Just a couple other questions. Says, regarding love letters, a buyer and seller will know one another's name anyhow. So does it really matter if the letter is included? I would say yes. You know, we've given the guidance about love letters, and NAR came out behind us doing their most recent guidance on love letters, discussing the exposure to liability based on violations of fair housing laws that it presents. So even if the parties know each other's name, depending on what that buyer says in that love letter, you know, if it references anything related to a protected class, then even if the seller isn't intending to consciously discriminate, it can happen. It could factor in their decision. So from our perspective, they're very problematic, and we follow the guide. We stand by the guidance that we prepared, and also by the guidance that National Association of Realtors prepared.
Okay.
And let me point out, I mean, the idea of not participating as the real estate agent, either on the buyer side or the seller side, in transmitting a love letter, that's to keep you out of trouble. The agents and the licensees involved in the transaction, if the parties do what they want to do, that doesn't implicate you. But if you're involved in transmitting it as part of the offer or forwarding it to your seller client as part of the offer as you present it, then you're implicated. If they've committed a violation, if that individual party, buyer or seller, has committed a violation, so be it. That's their problem. But if you are involved in transmitting the actual document, then you're on the hook for the violation as well. So you should stay out of it, and you should advise your clients to stay out of it and let them know that you'll have no part in transmitting it or drafting it or in any way helping them get it over to the other party.
Right.
We've got another question. Will you address service animals versus emotional support animals in rentals, the differences, what's acceptable and what isn't?
I think we might just, if we have time at the end, I think we could talk about that, but that wasn't on the original agenda. I can talk about that for an hour if you want to call. If we have time at the end, we'll go over that. We can go over that pretty quickly. But I think right now we probably should move on to our next topic. You ready, Colette? I think that's you, advertising.
Yeah, can you pull up the National Association of Realtor guidance? Because we were talking about this preparation yesterday, and NAR always has such great guidance. So as you can see, this is they've just really been hitting on the hot button issues. So again, when we talk about advertising, you know, Kathleen mentioned when it comes to steering and kind of making sure that you avoid going down that road. Same thing with advertising. You can use these best practices here that are outlined, that NAR has outlined in conjunction with the advertising checklist that the Maryland Real Estate Commission has prepared to ensure that you steer clear of violating the advertising requirements under fair housing. There's a couple of points to keep in mind about advertising when it comes to fair housing. And this is, I mean, just kind of stands true generally. Just keep in mind that advertising is so broadly defined. It's broadly defined under the Fair Housing Act. It's broadly defined under Maryland law. It includes pretty much everything down to your business cards, anything that has information about the services that you provide, whether it's a business card or you know, automobile signage or newspaper, radio, social media, where you are actually advertising your services. You want to make sure that you're compliant both with Maryland law, which you've got the Maryland Real Estate Commission checklist there. And of course, you want to make sure that you steer clear of violating the advertising requirements under the Fair Housing Act. The other thing I would say, and this is something that we kind of teach in the Fair Housing course fairly, you know, consistently, nothing new here, is beware of focusing on the audience and preferences. You want to steer clear of that. Now, we've seen a couple of advertisements prepared by some of our members that have generated a lot of discussion around whether or not the advertisement seemed to suggest that they were looking for a particular type of person, a family or whatever, to purchase the property. You want to steer clear of doing that in your advertisements and really try to focus on and highlight the characteristics of the property. Like I said, can you think of any examples, Mark or Kathleen, in any of your classes or any questions that you've received specifically about advertising and fair housing?
There are some that appear to express a preference. That was something that I think there was a question that came in recently. There was some, I think the advertising described the property as perfect for families or perfect for a family, or can't you picture your family here? Things like that. Those are all things you want to stay away from because it could indicate a preference, you know, for or against a certain person to live in that community or live in that home. So you'd have to stay away from that. Did you have any examples, Mark?
So yeah, I mean, from the Long Island videos, they talked about crime statistics sometimes that were intended to portray a particular neighborhood as heavily minority. So stay away from those as well. If your clients are asking about public safety issues, refer them to publicly available websites. And there was a question in the chat about whether or not it's permissible to assist a client that's looking for a property that's walking distance from a particular religious institution or school or workplace. That's always permissible. You can always just say, what do you consider walking distance, and draw, on a map, draw a half mile or a mile around the particular institution or site that they want to look for, and then limit the house search or the apartment search to within those particular kind of neighborhoods or blocks.
Right.
Or within that geographic feature. So that's always permissible. Just stay away yourself from mentioning those kinds of amenities in your advertisements or in your discussions with your clients.
Right. I think the key mark for that, like if someone wants to live within a certain distance of the synagogue, you would not look at someone and say, well, that person is Orthodox Jewish. I'm sure they want to live here, because they want to live in this area because it's walking distance to the synagogue. You can't make that determination. They can tell you, I want to live this close to the synagogue. I want to live walking distance to my church. I want to live whatever. They can narrow the criteria. You should not narrow the criteria. But that's just to clarify or add to what Mark had said. He's exactly right on all of those things. Those are certainly permissible. The client can establish that criteria. That's kind of exactly what we're talking about, objective criteria. I want to live within X distance from this site, this school, this job, this whatever it is. And that's perfectly fine. Again, the client is establishing the objective criteria.
Okay. All right, so just a couple of points here. Focus on the property and its amenities, not on your ideal buyer or renter. Like you said, so many times we've seen ads where the focus tends to be on the ideal buyer. So steer clear of that and showcase the attributes of the properties. And when you do that, we are of the view that you minimize your liability for violating fair housing advertising requirements. It says, don't make statements that have the effect of excluding individuals of a protected class from your advertising initiative. Not just statements, right? But any symbols. And we're not talking about subjective symbols, but symbols that suggest exclusion or anything like that. Any thoughts on that, Mark or Kathleen? Statements, yes.
The only thing that occurred to me off the top of my head is photographs. Remember, there was a situation recently where there were photographs in a listing.
Yeah.
That included basically symbols that are discriminatory. That would certainly tend to exclude a particular race and would be potentially deemed as I don't know if you would say hate speech, but pretty close to it, if not. But whether you would include a photo like that in your listing, not a good idea. I think that situation, I think someone must have contacted the broker, because I think within about 5 minutes, I think the listing was updated and those photos had been removed. I think there may be Bright MLS maybe looking into that as well. I think, Mark, was that something you had been?
Yeah, I had a conversation with their enforcement team this week, and they're preparing to update their technology and start trying to keep track of potentially offensive photographs and language in the advertisements. They'll click them over for a human review, kind of an automated review, digital review, and then it will be clicked over sometime soon. A human will do the review and then contact the agent about whether or not they've got a problem with a particular language, a particular photograph. So try to review your ads with an eye towards how they would look to someone from a protected class. Think carefully about what you're putting up, just as you would in thinking carefully about how you would speak to people at a party and if everyone knew you were a real estate agent. It's all about trying to create the right kind of friendly atmosphere for everyone, not just folks from your own kind of particular demographics.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. All right. So avoid restricting your advertisements from only reaching certain individuals or audiences by, for example, using platforms platform features that allow advertisers to restrict who sees the advertisement based on certain characteristics like race and religion. And I know there were some issues surrounding Facebook's use of these kind of features to restrict who's seeing the ad. You want to put it out there to, I mean, if you, and we talked about this a little bit as we were preparing for this, if you want to, and this is, guidance, again, this is nothing new. If you want to put an ad in a particular neighborhood, just also put one in a newspaper of general circulation so that you're reaching everybody possible. And that really, I think, when you do it that way, where you're focused on getting it out to as many people as possible, you really effectively promoting your client's interests. The more people that see the property, for example, the more the potential offers come in, the higher potentially the price can go. So keeping that in mind, if you use pictures of people in your advertisement, I know many people do, make sure that the ad includes individuals reflective of the population, the area where the advertisement is placed. So again, nothing revolutionary there. As Mark said, you want to think carefully about your marketing and use the checklist so that you steer clear. Include the phrase equal opportunity or the fair housing logo in your advertisements. I mean, again, if there were to be an issue with an ad, even if it was unintentionally done, the fact that you don't have if you didn't include it, if you don't have that equal housing opportunity logo or slogan or image there, then that's a question. That becomes a potential question and an avenue to suggest perhaps there was a violation. So at the very least, you want to include that. It says not only will this signify your commitment to fair housing to your audience, but HUD will also consider this language when determining your fair housing compliance efforts, right? So that's really important. Then finally, be familiar with applicable local, state fair housing that may afford even broader protections. We've just recently updated our fair housing materials, right in time for April. It's on the website, and we thank the government affairs folks. They worked with us very closely to update our fair housing guidance, which addresses the protected classes on the federal, the state, and the local level, and also has some best practices there. So that is, I believe that is posted on our website. It was featured in the magazine that came out. So that's another, as Kathleen was mentioning earlier, that's another kind of sales meeting opportunity to review that, go over that, make sure that you have that handy and with you at all times. But remembering what the protected classes are on the local level, I think is key, because you always have to keep in mind when it comes to fair housing and protected classes, we're talking about federal, state, and local. And oftentimes, depending on where you are, Montgomery County, Howard County, a lot of these jurisdictions have quite a few additional protected classes that you want to be mindful of. So you, Mark or Kathleen, you have anything to add to the guidance here that I think is very good from NAR?
No, I think that was pretty thorough. And
I agree. Very, very comprehensive.
Let's go back and move on to our next topic. And again, we'll try and get to some of the questions at the end. Where are we now? Is that showing pocket listings?
Pocket listings.
All right, Mark, you want to talk about pocket listings, the hot topic?
Yeah, just for a couple of minutes, perhaps, and maybe we'll talk about it some more in questions and answers. So, pocket listings is part of the fair housing discussion, not just because it's kind of a hot issue these days and in a very challenging market for buyers, a terrific hot market for sellers, but very, very tough on buyers these days. I'm sure everyone understands and recognizes how difficult the market is now for buyers trying to find a place to purchase. But just as Kathleen was talking at the outset of the program about how steering buyers in towards particular neighborhoods or away from particular neighborhoods based on their demographics or perceived demographic affiliations and protected class situations. A pocket listing is a potential technique, a sneaky sort of surreptitious technique that can be used to steer sellers towards excluding particular buyers from being competitive in a particular transaction to purchase a particular property. Pocket listings are, of course, some form of marketing that excludes and doesn't make use of the multiple listing service, the Bright MLS system in our marketplace. And the idea, of course, is for agents typically to obtain a quick and best possible price sale for their seller clients. And there's an argument, of course, that pocket listings help them achieve that, help them market more exclusive properties in more exclusive neighborhoods to a more exclusive set of potential buyers. The trouble is when you're using a pocket listing and not using the multiple listing service, the multiple listing service was designed with the idea of creating a all-encompassing, very wide and very extensive marketplace for real estate agents and brokers to exchange information about properties for sale and to exchange information about commissions that are available and sales opportunities for the individual real estate brokerage professionals. And when you take your listing, your seller client's listing off of the multiple listing service, there's the possibility, in fact, the likelihood that not all interested buyers are going to see the advertisement and you will be excluding somebody or some group of individuals from at least considering whether they're going to make an offer on the property. And if that's the case, there's a conceivable chance that it's excluding a particular demographic that could be a protected class. And that's what we're trying to help you avoid in trying to deal with the pocket listings as a topic here on fair housing in the Fair Housing webinar. So pocket listings typically means some form of advertising or marketing that excludes the multiple listing. Maybe it's signs or handbills or emails to a particular client list, but you keep it within the particular brokerage and you don't send it out beyond very small limited marketing opportunities. It can be used, pocket listings sometimes also use websites, but not the multiple listing service. So some sort of publicly available website is oftentimes used, but not typically the multiple listing service. And of course, Bright has very specific rules and regulations about how quickly you must put a property up on the multiple listing service once it's publicly marketed. They also use the coming soon option as a way to test market a property. Those are all opportunities that members of the multiple listing service and realtors are entitled to use. And we encourage you to use, because that's the way to best immunize yourself and your sellers from a potential fair housing violation. And I think it's only a matter of time before the testers and the enforcement authorities figure out that these forms of marketing for sellers also have the potential of excluding demographic groups that are protected classes, and start sending the testers out to try and figure out who's using it in an impermissible way. It is, in fact, perfectly legal and perfectly appropriate if your client, your seller client, has chosen for privacy reasons or for some other personal reason not to market the property on the multiple listing service. You're entitled to apply for an exception to the requirements of the multiple listing service rules if they've made an informed decision not to market on the multiple listing service. They're entitled to do that. But if you're doing it for an impermissible reason, I think it's only a matter of time before the enforcement authorities figure it out and start pursuing these issues. And Bright has a very vigorous enforcement mechanism with $5,000 fines, starting at $5,000 fines for folks who don't correctly use the coming soon designation, who don't market their properties on the multiple listing service within that 1 business day rule of publicly marketing the property. So take care, that can be very expensive. And Bright has also started discussing and seems to be coming forward sometime soon with an even more vigorous enforcement mechanism, because they recognize that their initial form of discipline and enforcement with a warning to the real estate agent or broker, because the market's moving so quickly, they recognize that that warning system just is not up to dealing with the circumstances and the realities of today's seller's marketplace. So they're intending to come forward with something even more vigorous in the very near future to address the speed of this current market. So be aware of that, be ready for it. and take care to advise your clients on pocket listings and why they might not be in their best interest. Sometimes a real estate agent may look to a pocket listing as a way to efficiently manage a quick sale of a home that's in the benefit and the best interest of the real estate agent or broker rather than their client. And that's, of course, never okay. Always be thinking about what's best for your seller, not about what's best and most convenient and easiest for you. That's pretty much what I've got to tell you all about what's going on with pocket listings. The Bright MLS folks updated their policy about a year ago, and they're doing their very best to deal with these issues. There's a process on their website and a mechanism on their website to report violations. And I think we all need to be aware of those violations as we see them occurring, and sending them up to Bright for Bright to enforce this mechanism for the benefit of the entire industry, for the benefit of all of us. And that's the way the marketplace will work at its most efficient and its most profitable for all agents in the business.
Hey, Mark and Colette, maybe I guess if you want to answer either, there's a quick question on the
Yeah,
chat. Would it be considered a pocket listing if the owner wants to sell to the current tenants and ask not to list?
So no, I don't think that's considered a pocket listing. That's just a decision to sell to a particular person that they're probably not even marketing at all.
Right.
So that's not really a pocket listing, I don't think, and it's not a potential violation of the Bright rules and regulations. I mean, I think we can check with Bright for you about that, but no, I don't think that's a violation of the Bright rules.
Okay, I would agree with that. And then Annie says, what thoughts on sight unseen offer taken by seller that was put into coming soon?
So sight unseen offers are never a good idea, not for you, not for your client. Really, we teach this in the agency class. Never a good idea. So, and keeping them out of the multiple listing service is also not a great idea. The best way to serve your client and get the best and most efficient sales price is to go up to the is to post it to the multiple listing service. I mean, that's the assumption that we all operate under, that the greatest number of eyes seeing an advertisement is what's going to promote the greatest interest and the best possible competitive offers for a particular property. That's the assumption that we all operate under. And by limiting in any fashion the dissemination and the kind of promotion of a particular property to a limited group, that's not going to promote efficiency. You may get a good price in this marketplace, but it may not be the best price and it may not be the best terms for your client. And ladies and gentlemen, this hot market's not going to last forever. Someday it will change and shift and back towards buyers. And then you'll have to try to address your practices and procedures in a way that will deal with the realities of the new marketplace.
Right. I think you've done a great job with pocket listings. I think we could move on just kind of quickly. I think maybe talk about source of income just a little bit.
Well, I'll just talk about it quickly. October 1st, this past October 1st, 2020, a source of income became the law of the land in the state of Maryland. The truth is that the Maryland Realtors resisted this as long as possible because with participation in some of the assisted housing voucher programs, it requires landlords and property owners to make modifications to their properties. And we thought it was best and most reasonable for landlords to volunteer into those kinds of programs if it was going to require them to modify or update or improve their properties. But we saw over the last few years, lots of the local Maryland jurisdictions were moving towards source of income in their local jurisdictions. And we knew it was only a matter of time before the state adopted the legislation, which they did last year. And the governor signed it into law last summer, and it became the law of the land October 1st, 2020. There are a limited number of exemptions, but any lawful form of income now pretty much has to be accepted by just about every landlord. There's a Mrs. Murphy style exemption for owner-occupied properties that are 5 or fewer units. But beyond that, if the housing voucher covers the full cost of the rent and any additional costs that the tenant must cover, like utilities, then you're pretty much going to have to accept those vouchers for the particular property. If the voucher does not cover the full value of the rent, the full cost of the rent, and any additional costs like the utilities. Then there's a question about whether or not there's a sufficient source of income to support paying the rent. And we've heard recently from some of the local counties and from a few callers on Legal Hotline that some of the counties are not keeping up with the values of their vouchers, so that the rents that are rising rapidly, just as sales prices are rising very rapidly, the vouchers don't seem to be keeping pace with marketplace rents. So if there's a difference, a shortfall on the voucher, the value of the voucher versus the market value of the property for rent, the landlord need not accept the voucher because it doesn't cover the full voucher, full payment on the rent and any additional costs that are required. So we can take additional calls on the hotline if you have particular questions about how to deal with source of income, but it's mostly about the Section 8 vouchers, and it's mostly a requirement for real estate professionals and their clients to participate and comply.
Right. Just a reminder, we did a webinar back in October of last year as well, and we had a guest speaker on, Mary Groven, who does a lot of property management and was very familiar with some of the voucher programs, the housing choice voucher, as well as some other voucher programs. And that webinar is available if you guys want to take a look at that back again. That was a lot more detail and a lot more of a focus on source of income. So that could be another resource for you guys. So let's move on to our next topic. And what do we have? Clients who discriminate. Aha. What do you do if you have a client who wants to discriminate? I think this is something that's we're becoming more aware of as well. I think maybe it's been going on for a long time and people didn't talk about it, but now, there's a big focus on fair housing, right? On improper practices. There is one case that was a pretty high profile. It was a property was up in Rhode Island, and the buyer and the seller had been going back and forth. I think offers were exchanged, counter offers were exchanged, and they had come to a meeting of the minds, right? They had an agreement as to what the terms were going to be. Awesome, fantastic. Buyer's agent sends that offer over to the listing agent. Listing agent is excited. This is everything the seller wanted. The buyers have agreed to it. Listing agent presents that offer to the sellers, and they see the buyer's name, and they ask the listing agent, is the buyer black? Are the buyers black? And the listing agent said, yes, they are. And the seller said, I'm not going to sell my home to black people. So that was it. They would not sign the offer. That was everything they had asked for, everything they wanted. The buyer had come up and they had gone back and forth. Everything the seller wanted, the buyer had agreed to. As soon as they saw the buyer's name, it was her first name in that case. Her first name was Ebony, and that made the sellers ask. And then the seller said they weren't going to sign it. So clients who discriminate, part of that is the client is discriminating, right? The real world is, what the heck do I do? I'm the listing agent. I'm representing this seller, right? What do I do? I don't want to be in that situation. So that case that was up in Rhode Island, it really is a kind of a textbook example of how to respond in that situation. The listing agent contacted her broker, her office manager immediately, and they terminated their relationship with that seller. They terminated the listing agreement and refused to represent that seller. And the listing agent, I guess, had to communicate with the buyer's agent what had happened. I mean, 10 minutes before we had a deal, they had reached terms, everything's great, we're moving forward, and all of a sudden the seller won't sign it, right? So what happened in that situation, the listing agent spoke with the broker, they terminated their relationship with the seller, and they did communicate with the buyer's agent and let the buyer's agent know what had happened, what the sellers had said. And as it progressed, the buyers ended up filing a lawsuit. It's a federal case. The buyers ended up filing a lawsuit against the sellers for violating the fair housing laws. And the listing agent is cooperating with and assisting the buyers. The listing agent submitted an affidavit just outlining exactly what had happened, just the facts that we just went through briefly. And the listing agent is supporting the buyers in that lawsuit. This morning, I just went online and just checked to see what the status of it was. I think it's just a procedural things are happening right now. It had been moved it was originally being heard in Massachusetts, and they've moved it back to Rhode Island where the property is located. That's the only thing that's happened procedurally. But that sounds crazy, right? Who would reject an offer just because of the buyer's name? So I had heard about that through an NAR presentation. I think we had talked about it, the staff, the legal department, the dream team had talked about it. And within a week, I'm not exaggerating, within 1 week, we heard about the exact same situation from agents here in Maryland. In that case, it wasn't the first name that had triggered the response, but it was a buyer's last name. Same exact situation. The buyer and the seller had been going back and forth, counter offers. They had reached a meeting of the minds, reached terms. Buyer's agent sends the offer over. The seller see the buyer's name. In this case, it was a last name that they thought sounded African. And they said, we're not going to sell our home to those people. So again, don't think this happens just down south. Don't think it happens only in certain areas. It happens, right? So what do you do if you're working with that seller? You represent that seller. I think what we just went through, what happened up in Rhode Island, that is probably really the textbook way to respond. It's very clear. You are not condoning the seller's conduct. You don't approve of the seller's conduct. You're not going to represent that seller, right? That might happen. I mean, I hope that it doesn't. I hope you can explain to your clients how fair housing laws work and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but you might have that client. And if you have that client, you can't roll with that client, right? You have to terminate that relationship, or you're putting yourself at risk. You're putting your brokerage at risk. It's not worth it, right? So that's something that you would have to be prepared to deal with. I looked at some quick notes I had for myself, other examples of clients who might be behaving badly, right? Clients who want to discriminate. Just a couple situations that came through on the legal hotline. We had, what did we have? Oh, I think one was a landlord tenant. Someone was working with the tenant, brings the tenant to see the property. The landlord / owner is the one who happens to be there. He opens the door, looks at the potential tenant, looks her up and down and says, "Oh, I don't think so," and slams the door in her face. She was a young Black woman. Another situation we had was potential blind buyer with a guide dog. The sellers had just refinished their home and redone the wood floors. They didn't want to let the potential buyer view the property with their guide dog. They thought the guide dog was going to scratch the floors and ruin the floors. They didn't want to let the buyer in, or potential buyer in, with their guide dog. What else do we have? The landlord tells a listing agent they won't rent to applicants because they had too many kids. Landlord wants to reject an applicant who had 5 therapy cats. Landlord wants to reject an applicant who would be using a voucher. I mean, it takes a variety of forms where discrimination could be evident. Your best practice, of course, if you can educate your client, use the brochure that we have. You can show them what protected classes are, explain to them what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. If someone is going to insist that they are going to violate the law, or regardless of what you say, they're not going to sell to that buyer, then you can't represent that client. I mean, I hate to say that. I hope it doesn't come to that, but that might be where it ends up. So what do? You have that client, what do you do? Where do you report it? How do you, just go back to the office and complain about it and say, what a jerk? You actually could do a little bit more than that, right? Let's think about this. Where would you report them? Would you report them to the Maryland Real Estate Commission? No, because probably your client is not licensed, right? So the Real Estate Commission would have no jurisdiction over them. Would you file a complaint with your local board saying it's a violation of the Code of Ethics? Probably not again. Presumably your client is not a realtor, not a member of the local board. If the other agent is sort of condoning this or going along with this, then that might be something you'd have to consider. Both of them might be something you'd consider. But if the client is not a licensee, not a realtor, those 2 options wouldn't work, obviously. So what we would recommend is you should contact the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. They are the agency here in Maryland. They pursue all types of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, public accommodations, if a restaurant is not accessible or things like that. The Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, that's what they do all day, every day. They have investigators, they have intake officers, case investigators, and they can investigate these claims and pursue these claims. If you want to, the website for them, it's MCCR, Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, MCCR.Maryland spelled out .gov. And one thing I'm just going to point out, I think I learned this last year. I'll admit it openly. I didn't know this before. The Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, if they do an investigation, a complaint is filed, they do an investigation. Potentially someone who's been harmed could receive money, could receive monetary damages. And I just learned last year for the first time that potentially could include a realtor, right? If you are representing that buyer, right? You're representing the buyer with the African sounding name, and the buyer and seller have reached an agreement, have reached terms. You submit the offer to the seller refuses to sign it because your client has an African sounding last name. you could file a complaint with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights as the realtor, and potentially you have lost whatever your commission was, right? But for this discrimination, you would have earned a commission of whatever percentage of whatever the sales amount was, right? So you actually could be an aggrieved party under the rules of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, as well as your client, obviously, as well. They were denied the opportunity to purchase the home that they wanted. But I was not aware until last year that the realtor could also file a claim and potentially receive an award of the commission that was lost because of the seller's misconduct and violation of the fair housing laws. So that would be my recommendation, to report those type of issues with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. And I'm just going to say, in general, I think I have sort of mixed emotions on this. In general, I worked at a brokerage before. We're an association. We represent members. We really don't want to encourage people to run out and file claims all the time for something that happens. You know, we like to encourage broker to broker conversations and trying to work things out. However, there's some things that can't be worked out. There's some things that shouldn't be worked out. There are sometimes some conduct is so egregious and so outrageous that it should be reported. Intentional, deliberate discrimination and violation of the Fair Housing Act, I would suggest, is that type of conduct. So, you know, I live here in Baltimore. What do we have? We have the Stop Snitching Code here in Baltimore. We're encouraging everybody, start snitching. We really want to encourage people to file these claims. That's how the word gets out. You know, some agent who maybe thinks they have to follow what their seller does, or they don't really want to cross their seller, antagonize their seller. If they find out that a complaint could be filed against them, that they could have a monetary award entered against them, that they could be found in violation of the fair housing laws, that's how the word gets out, and that's how conduct changes. So like I said, in general, I'm not one to encourage somebody to run out and file a complaint all the time, but I think to a certain extent, I think we got to start snitching. Colette, Mark, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think just making people aware of where they can go to, or, you know, where a client can go if they feel like they've been discriminated against, I think is really helpful.
All right, we had a couple questions. We have just a couple minutes left, I think. Do we have well, let's see if we can do a couple real quick. What about agents that discriminate against agents? Agents, again, you have more options. You could file a complaint with the Maryland Real Estate Commission. You could also file a complaint with your local board. Look at Article 10 in the NAR Code of Ethics. That typically would be the
It's actually, Kathy, that question is a good one, because I believe it's both Article 10 and I believe there was a new standard of practice under Article 3 of the NAR Code of Ethics that was adopted last year. Realtors may not refuse to cooperate on the basis of a broker's race or any of the other protected classes listed under Article 10. So both
Right.
Article 3 and Article 10, you open the door to potential violations there if you discriminate against another agent because they're a member of one of the protected classes under Article 10, in addition to any state and federal claims you might have.
Another question was, would that include the listing agent as well? And that is potentially the listing agent could be involved, in all honesty. That's why I kind of focused on what the listing agent had done with the Rhode Island property. They terminated their relationship with the seller, stopped representing the seller. Not every listing agent does that. Honestly, the one case that I mentioned from the legal hotline where the a tenant, the agent working with the tenant, she contacted the agent who was representing the landlord and told her what had happened, and had a conversation and said, basically, you need to stop representing this guy. You know, he's violating the fair housing law. And I received one follow-up communication, and the listing agent did not terminate her relationship with that seller. So I don't know how that plays out, but really you can't be part of this pattern or practice. You as an agent, as a listing agent, you can't work with that seller. You can't cooperate or assist or facilitate a seller who's discriminating. So potentially, yes, it could involve the listing agent as well. And what else do we have? What about students who have an out-of-state cosigner for a lease? That's maybe not directly related, but yeah, a student can have an out-of-state cosigner. I don't think there's any problem with that. If my kid goes to school in North Carolina, I would be a cosigner on his, well, I might not, but but theoretically, I would be a cosigner on his lease, even though I'm a Maryland resident cosigning for someone in North Carolina. And I haven't looked at jurisdiction in a while, but I think if you're a cosigner for a lease for property in North Carolina, I think you would avail yourself of the court system in North Carolina. So I think you could be sued there. So I think that would be okay. Did we have any other questions, or we want to wrap it up?
Let's see. Just
I was trying to keep up with them while you were speaking. I was trying to type answers out on the chat.
Okay. Well, I think we're probably good then. We are a little bit over, and I apologize for that. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for staying here till the end. Let me stop there we go. Any questions that were submitted, our communications folks will keep track of those, and we'll divvy them up amongst the attorneys, and we'll respond to those in writing over the next couple of days. Thank you for joining us. Great questions. I can see the faces you were making at me. No, good questions, good participation, and we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you
Take
for
care, everybody.
attending today's webinar. Our next webinar is scheduled for May 6th. Stay tuned to your email for an announcement of the topic soon. Until then, remember you can download our new fair housing brochure from our website. Follow the special fair housing banner on the front page to get there. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.